Happy Monday. Happy Martin Luther King Day. And welcome to Power Talk. I'm your host, Adrienne, and I am excited to join you today to share my insights as well as the insights of my guest. My guest today is Petra Nicole. She is from Bavaria in Germany, and she kind of grew up, and we're going to talk about this, under the shadow of the World War II Nazi regime there. She's a second generation war survivor, and she's had just an amazing life. I'm blown away that she can be so young and have gone through as much as she had. But she's had a near-death experience. She's gone through the pain and sorrow of her mother's death, dealing with suicide, of others, depression, and just her journey towards becoming a seeker after truth. Her website is www.petranicole.com, Petranicoll. And Petra's passionate about helping people to clear unresolved emotional issues through her spiritual and success coaching. So you can find out everything you need to know on her website. And today we're going to talk about her new book, Petras Ashes, which is fascinating. I just finished it. So welcome, Petra.
Welcome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me on your show.
You know, it had to have been a very cathartic experience writing Petras Ashes, I would imagine. What led you to actually do that?
Well, it was really interesting. It took me actually 3 years, and I thought I'd never finish it. In fact, my boyfriend said, "Are you ever going to finish this book?" And I said, it's like Leonardo da Vinci. I might never finish it. I don't know. This is this process that just keeps on going. But what really initiated writing this book was not just a near-death experience, but my experience with the gurus in India. And the fact that I had such a hard time, even though I was born in 1961, and I didn't really experience World War II, but I ended up sort of assimilating some of the pain that was going on around my family and the aftermath of the war. And the biggest one was really for me, the hospital where I had my near-death experience, and finding out later that was one of the places where General Himmler, one of the most notorious Nazis, did a program called Lebensborn for basically breeding the Aryan race. And both my mother and I were hospitalized there.
Yeah, and I know enough about you from reading your book to understand, that you're a natural empath and extremely intuitive. And so being hospitalized in that sort of an environment where there would have been all manner of energetic imprint, that had to have been startling, to say the least.
It was really interesting in my life. As I grew older, I realized that many things that were so hard and so emotional early on, because I didn't know how to organize them by picking up so much and being an empath, that later I used that as a tool to really feel into people. So I now really rejoice when I get to do that. Because it is the greatest and most amazing gift to me.
Oh, I agree, because that's my gift as well, and so, yeah, absolutely. But, as I read your book, I noticed there were so many recurring patterns in your life. And that's one of the things, I totally identified with everything that you wrote in your book, because I'm right now going through a process in my life where I am examining the patterns that I've dealt with throughout my lifetime and finding the ones that either no longer serve me or never served me, that I need to modify. And that's part of the work you do with people, right?
Exactly. I basically get I get them to sit down to tell me their story, and everybody has an amazing story. I've never really met anyone that doesn't have a story if I can get to the nuts and bolts.
Right, exactly.
And once we get the story, we see the patterns. of what's going on. And the patterns are usually set between the age of 0 to 7, where as a little kid, you download everything from your parents or your grandparents or whoever's raising you.
Exactly. And so, and each of us, carries a different set of those patterns. I mean, for me personally, mine was settling for less than I deserved, or thinking that I didn't deserve to have more, but each person has, their own little cross to bear, if you will, that they have to first identify, because you can't, until you are able to recognize the pattern, you're not able to let it go. And
well,
boy, you've had some amazing ones.
Well, I'm sure you have as well. I realized my pattern, for example, let's just say an example of what I recognize with my pattern, excuse me, was my father. I definitely married my father.
So did I.
Guilty as charged. So I didn't just do it once. I probably did it, the same relationship over and over and over until I decided, well, this is getting really boring now. I gotta change the pattern. And the pattern is always within us, always. Yeah. So when we're downloading, when I speak of, I do emotional energy processing with people, and really, when I look at someone and I see the childhood pattern, and I do golden light meditation where we run golden light through the body, and then we can see where it's blocked in the body. And those are the areas within the body where there's almost like a gray mass that shows up in the organs or the limbs. And in that is the movie that is literally locked on lockdown or stored in the body. It could be in the heart, in the lungs, wherever it may be. And once people see those pictures, they look like movie frames, literally. They come up. And once people see those pictures, they can then go into that room where that child is at that age, where that imprinting took place, and can then ask those people to leave the room, because the room represents the body of the child.
Right.
And so we said we come in with this golden light being that now says it's okay to grow in stature and size, and clean the room. And so once you clean the room, you can then reset all of these dark energies into more golden light. And then therefore, the energy of the light will flow through you. So it's above, so below. And
exactly.
We no longer have these emotional responses. But for me, it's always a giveaway when I have a friend. I have this very close friend who's very, very emotional. And she just cries, even on a commercial, she'd cry if she sees a commercial that's sad. And I explained this to her over and over and over, and said, as long as there's this emotional response to things, it doesn't mean we can't be, empathetic and feeling what others feel, but it's the emotional response, that intensity to things, that gives me the signal that there's still something blocked.
Right. Exactly. And, one of the, I guess, pivotal times for you in your life was a near-death experience. Can you share about what that was, how that happened, and what you learned from that?
Well, I was a very precocious child, and I wanted to be part of the action all the time. And I was really, really, really sick. But I didn't tell my mom how bad it was. And I'm still like that today. I would not talk about how sick I am to anyone if I got sick, although, touch wood, I'm a healthy person. So my aunt Maggie had just moved into a new apartment, and I wanted to be over there for the first night they moved in, and she and my uncle Jürgen. And the next morning, I remember that night, I was coughing so much that my rib cage was hurting from the coughing. And I had this ice cold shower running down my spine a few times a night. And the next morning, my aunt Maggie took me to the doctor, Dr. Holley on Bahnhofstrasse, and he reprimanded her, and he told her, get that child out of the cold now, you know. And he gave her some medicine for me, and she drove me up to the house, and I think it was already noon. And it was a super cold winter day in Bavaria, in my little town, Marktschwaben. And when I got to the house, it was maybe 12:30 by then. My mom had bundled me up on the couch, given me some of this medicine, and, you know, tucked me in, played some classical music. And I never forget, I was laying on the couch, and she and my brother had to run into town to get gloves for the next school day. My brother had lost his gloves that day. And it was getting dark by 3 o'clock. It was, you know, such heavy snow. I mean, snowflakes this size and beautiful out. So I was looking through the balcony window. The balcony door had glass, so I could see the snow falling on the deck of the balcony. And as the snow was falling, there was a street light that would light up the snowflakes. So it was sort of meditative, where you could see these snowflakes just coming down, and it was getting higher and higher literally on the door. And that was so in my mind, that feeling of snow and this purity of the snow. And then I fell asleep, and then suddenly was awoken by this excruciating pain. And I mean, a piercing pain of not being able to breathe. And I stood up abruptly and raised my arms up high to open my lungs. And I was trying to breathe, and I was holding my ribs, and I realized my ribs were sticking out. And my stomach was completely sucked in, and my ribs sticking out, and couldn't breathe. And there was this wheezing sound, like I heard with a friend who had asthma. And I had heard that sound before, so I got really scared, because I thought I was having an asthma attack. And then the pain went on for 20 minutes or so. And I suddenly had no more energy left, and I just collapsed on the ground, and I saw this light, this peace came over me. And I just saw this light and this humming sound. It sounded almost like the Om sound. And then the next thing, my mom gets home with my brother, screams as she sees me on the ground, laying under the coffee table, and drags me out from under the coffee table, and tells my brother to watch me while she calls 911 and my father. And they rushed me to the hospital. And by the time we got to the hospital, I was literally on the ceiling. I was on the ceiling looking down at my father, whose tears were dropping on my face. And I was trying to get his attention. I said, "Papi, Papi, I'm up here. Look up, I'm okay." And he, of course, couldn't hear me, because he thought I was dying on the hospital bed. And then I saw my mother. That was heartbreaking to see her outside signing a document that they had to cut my throat open in order to save me, and that it was a very dangerous surgery. I had a croup attack, but we didn't know it was croup until they got me to the hospital. I guess there had been so much mucus, and the medicine loosened it up, and I was laying flat. And so it accelerated that feeling. And my mother's energy, what was so fascinating to me was that I could literally slip into her body and feel her emotion. So feel what she was feeling. And she was feeling dread and hopelessness. But she had been in that same hospital for 2 years, locked away with polio right after the war. So you can imagine what this must have been like for her, to have her little girl in that same environment. And my
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Oh, and my dad's fear. And then I saw another room where doctors were scrubbing up, and they were getting ready for the surgery. And I could tell they were anxious as well, because everyone's emotions, it was as if everything was translucent. You know, I could go through walls and on the ceiling, and then suddenly I was shot, literally shot with the speed of light through this tunnel that was like clouds, but bright, bright, bright light. And, you know, people tell that a lot when they have near-death experiences. They see the light in the tunnel. And it was amazing because I came through this tunnel, shooting through this tunnel, and suddenly came out in this gigantic library. And that was cool because that library, I'd never seen a building this big. And it had floor after floor after floor. There was no end to the floors. And now I know, of course, it was the Akashic record, you know. So it was. So I then saw in a distance these 3 or 4 elders standing with these old cloaks, white and brown. And as soon as I saw them, I was with them. You know, like the thought immediately carried me to them. So I was standing in the circle and I recognized one of them as Yeshua or Jesus. And he looked up and he was smiling at me and they were giggling. They were having a blast with me because I immediately went into a debate how I'm not going back. So it was telepathic communication. And I was telling them, I don't want to go back. Am I done now? And then one of them had this big tethered leather book in his hand and says, let's see where we're going to take you. You know, like, who can we get? And yeah, obviously they did send me back, but it was interesting because I felt that the spirit or the soul that was there in that body might not necessarily have been the girl that was living there before. I felt like I had a walk-in experience, and later on into being that I had the great fortune of meeting a wonderful healer from Chicago who had written a book about walk-ins, and she said, you know, there are sometimes soul exchanges. Have you been in a coma? She picked me out of a crowd and basically told me and asked me if I had been in a coma, and I said yes. So that's what happened. And so coming back and waking up the next morning was very startling. At first, I felt as if all this memory was downloaded into me, but I wasn't conscious. I was only a 9-year-old at the time.
Right.
But sort of like I had to assimilate everything that had happened until age 9. And then my mother and my aunt Irene came in to the hospital, and I was in this intensive care unit. And, you know, you have to imagine this is a big, big hospital with a huge room with wooden floors. And there was this door that is similar to the sound when you open an old castle door and it makes a squeak.
Oh boy.
And they're walking through and coming towards my little bed. And when I woke up, I opened my eyes and there was only one child next to me in a crib that had, you know, that was for a little baby. And this child was perhaps 1 or 2 years old, and he had a sort of a growth on his mouth, like a mushroom, some infection. And so when I saw that, I immediately closed my eyes. I couldn't look at it. It looked sort of green. And when my mother and my aunt were standing next to my bed, I closed my eyes, and my mother was stroking my head and kissing my forehead. And I wanted them to tell me what had happened. I wanted to get the information. And my mother, excuse me, I should have not had the milk this morning. So my mom, she was so sad and so grateful at the same time. You know, I could tell that she was just so relieved. This person was so relieved. And as she kissed me on the forehead, she was telling my aunt that it was a group attack and that they saved me and they didn't have to cut my throat, and that they actually had put a hose down my throat and pumped out an entire quart jar of mucus.
Wow.
So this was always, you know, for me, my lungs were the weakest point. And often when I work with people, I tell them that when somebody has a lot of respiratory problems or asthma, it has to do with the lungs and grief.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and you had another situation later on in life where you fell through the floor and you broke ribs that almost killed you then. So there's been a lot of that heart center stuff that you've had to deal with in your lifetime.
Exactly. It was interesting. I recognized that the lesson was for me throughout my life is to be happy, to work through the paradigm of my Bavarian programming. You should be worried. You should feel guilty, about the Catholic Church. You have to feel guilty all the time that you're never doing enough. I was already so driven in myself that I still felt I wasn't doing enough. I was never doing enough. I could never work enough or be enough. And
we have to work hard to earn God's love.
Exactly. And to actually be in a place of gratitude and sit down and write a book for 3 years and not feel guilty about it. I tell you, it was such a test for me to sit in this beautiful space on a lake, looking out to the lake, and write this book, and sometimes spend 4 weeks scrapping chapter after chapter because I didn't like it, and rewriting it again, and giving myself permission that it was all right to just sit and write and do nothing else except maybe eat something, go out for dinner, or exercise. And that was all I did for 3 solid years.
Yeah, and I believe that everyone who reads your book is going to gain their own personal insights, as I did, about the repetitive patterns that we go through, about the limiting beliefs that we have from our childhood and from our families. And, so what a gift that is. I think each of us probably gets called to do their own thing. For me, it was when I received the healing modality InnerSpeak, and I sat in front of a computer for 3 months, and all I did was type, eat, sleep, and go to the bathroom, and that was it. So I relate to what you're saying, and it's a gift. I mean, that was a gift for me and for others, and what you've done is a gift for you and for others, because I'm sure that by getting it out of you and onto paper and reviewing it, you were able to fully, probably, and finally release it from your life.
Well, it was, there were moments, I have to be honest, there were moments where I thought, why am I even writing this? Should I even bother? I could be doing 1,000 other things right now. But what was so fascinating was that right as the book got published, I met this extraordinary woman who's a medium. And there were unresolved issues around my mother's death. Mm. My mother died under very strange circumstances, and I found her dead in the kitchen a day after my 16th birthday. Although my brother corrected me, he said it was 2 days after my 16th birthday. Yeah. Visited him in Munich, and my parents had an argument that night, and the next morning I found my mother. Mm. And there was a question of, was the death caused by my father, who struck her in bed, or was the death caused by her falling into the chair that essentially cut off her jugular vein and caused stopped the oxygen from flowing to the brain, mm-hmm. which was in the autopsy the cause of death. But my whole life I spent wondering how she really died. Right. And so I spent many, many years thinking about how I had wished the forensic science was a little bit more advanced in those days, that I could prove that it was through the blow on the nose and possibly on the neck that already pre-injured her to then fall into that chair. But what had happened... So have you been able to let that go? There was a lot of letting go throughout my life in this, because my family has not let go. There's not a single person in my entire family that has let go of this, because I protected my father from being investigated as a 16-year-old. I literally stopped the investigation by
Yeah.
hiding evidence.
Yeah.
But that's what we do as children. We protect our parents. But
Oh yeah, that's another one of those patterns that that I noticed and I identified with through your book, was trying to fix things, to enable or to help over and over and over again. And boy, I've done that too. Not anymore, because I think I finally got that. That it doesn't help. It only forestalls the person learning their spiritual lessons.
Exactly, it's an interference, actually. So
Exactly.
what happened with this newfound friend who's a medium, my book comes out and I immediately meet her. It's like the universe, completely orchestrated this. It was so incredible. I happened to go to this reading because a friend of mine had just lost her husband and I wanted to be there to support her. I really didn't have an intention to have a reading because I didn't need a reading, I felt. So I ended up being in this room with this lady for 20 minutes, and she's just laughing and telling me about my book and how successful it's going to be and how great my life is going to be and how I should relax for the next few months because life's going to get so busy. And she ends up coming to a book signing party in Portland. I hosted a book signing with the other authors in a book called Life Sparks. It was a book that my friend Tammy Blodgett did, and it has 21 authors, and one of my story, Comatose, is in the book. And so I thought it'd be fun to do a book signing in Portland and then go to our house in Woodland and have a little get together with the authors. And so our medium friend came along to the house, and the next morning after I made breakfast for everyone, they left and went for hikes and stuff, and my friend and I were alone, and she gave me this extraordinary reading. She said, I need to talk to you because your mother and your father have been picking on me all morning long. And I said, what do you mean they've been picking on you? Well, they have to talk to you. So I said, okay, does that mean we're having a reading now? She said, yes, we're having a meeting now. So I recorded it, and she said, okay, do you have a question right out of the gate? And I said, yeah, I want to know if this was, manslaughter. And my mom's response was, yes. But immediately behind it, she said, but I charged him that night. I attacked him. And he defended himself because that night she found out that my father had an affair and must have attacked him with an object. And he defended himself. She goes downstairs, dies. Then my father comes into the story and says, wait a minute, I also had a lot to do with raising you, and I want some of this credit too for being your father. And then my friend said that they were both together and so happy on the other side. And she explained that, you have situations in life where people do something to each other and one person passes, or, there's a divorce and people don't like each other. She said, you have to understand, on the other side, there is no such thing as held emotion or anger or unforgiveness. Everything is...
No, it's just like, oh, isn't that nice? I thought it was so interesting when you struck me and I went downstairs and I died, Wasn't that cool?
And she also said that she had to die early, and that was a lot of it was about me finding my path.
Right. Exactly. I get that.
What I came to when I went to India, I realized that, thank you, God. I mean, I miss my mother every day, but if she had been alive, I would have never, ever left Bavaria.
Exactly. We each have those things in our story. It's amazing. So viewers, I highly recommend this book. It's called Petras Ashes. The author is Petra Nicole. You've now met her, and her website is petranicole.com, PETRANICOLL. And we have gone through our time for today. And this has been fascinating. I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed meeting you. This is wonderful. So, listeners, check back next week. We're going to have another amazing visit with another great guest next week. And in the meantime, check out my website, jeanadrienne.com. I am opening now for mentorship clients for this year. There are 5 spots left. I work with 6 people each year to assist them in standing in their power and realizing who they are, what they're supposed to be doing, and getting on path. So until next week, remember, people who take responsibility for their lives create the realities they desire. Ciao.